the Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Hello and welcome back to the show. We are once again diving into scandal today. When business systems go bad. The last scandal edition, we covered the healthcare industry. Today, we jump into the travel and hospitality sector, which a lot of us can relate to. Maybe you're even listening to this now while your flight is overbooked and they're trying to get people to not fly. I'm Steven Zakash here once again with Tulio Siragusa and Ash Mar. Hey, guys.
Yes, let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's get into it.
Hello.
So we're diving into scandals and systems gone sideways in order to spot trends on where these systems broke down. And we're also looking at the solutions some of the companies took after the scandal, which are often really forcing them into this somewhat of a conscious capitalism approach. And yes, they may go kicking and screaming into the night during this process, which kind of brings us to our first scandal today, where United Airlines dragged a doctor off a flight because they overbooked. We're going to talk about that. Then we're going to touch on Airbnb and then look at the cruise industry. Let's get into the airline overbooking policies. A little background here on this case I just mentioned. So in 2017, it was a normal United Airlines flight from Chicago to Louisville that turned into a nightmare for Dr. David Dow. The flight was overbooked. Common practice in the airline industry where more tickets are sold than seats are available. United wanted to make room for crew members who needed to get to another flight. And when not enough volunteers came forward to give up their seats, then they resorted to involuntary removals. Dr. Dow was one of the passengers selected to leave the flight, and he refused, saying he needed to see his patients the next day. What happened next went viral. Security came in. Officers forcibly removed him from his seat. The video footage of this showed him being dragged down the aisle, bloodied and distressed. And the video spread all over the world, sparking kind of massive public outcry and raising some serious questions about airline policies and passenger rights. And the incident not only led to rightfully a PR disaster for United, but highlighted the significant flaws in the system. So let's jump into why airlines overbook flights in the first place and how this inherently flawed system can lead to such extreme solutions. Ash, why do airlines overbook as a practice? What's the reasons here?
Well, if the audience guessed it, it's always the main culprit is always the maximizing profits, right? Minimizing losses, maximizing profits, profit first model. So the reason why this ended up happening, typically airlines are trying to avoid the amount of no-shows that come up. And this was a pattern that they've caught on to. They're like, okay, we have a certain amount of no-shows. They have predictive modeling now where they're able to track this data of like predicting how many people are typically going to no-show. And they have this system in place where they overbook to counterbalance the no-shows. And typically this has worked for them. Emphasis on the word typically, right? Until 2017 came to light showing that this is not a model that is effective, especially when you're caring about the satisfaction and the experience of your customers. So unfortunately, Dr. Dow was one of the victims of this scenario where they were overbooked and the typical scenario did not occur. In this scenario, everybody was there and they started to involuntarily pull people out. The part that's mind-boggling about this whole thing is that they were so focused on what the industry standard was, the status quo, which is all the airlines do this. So you as a customer have to understand because this is the standard. So get, either hop on the wagon or get off, right? And that's essentially what was the situation, which, thankfully today they were able to, or at the time they were able to record it. Thank God for social media, and it was able to bring this to light, and the industry was able to make an adjustment to that. But it all came back to trying to maximize those profits.
Yeah, I can see. Okay, you got all these different flights coming in, all these different people coming and going. Some are late, some don't arrive, and then there's those, of course, just some people who just don't show up to the airport and miss their flight. So there's that, but there's the other side on here is hey, a reservation should be a reservation, right?
Yeah.
So I'm told you can take the reservation, but you can't keep it.
Yeah.
So, it's got this sort of inherent problem to begin with, very complex. I think, airlines try and solve this. They've got their compensation incentives, and a lot of times I think the amounts or the perceived values just maybe not enough to get that voluntary offloading. And then it seems like there's lack of passenger protections, right? It seems like a doctor, hey, I've got to be there tomorrow, and you can't just, pull this off and pull me off and yank me from this flight because you're affecting, the 10 patients I'm seeing tomorrow as well. So it seems like there's a lot of issues here. Tulio, what can be done to improve the system and prevent these kind of incidents in the future? And in this case, in this particular case, from getting this far out of hand, seems like.
I mean, it always comes back to the same principle, which is just a lack of empathy. These things happen because of a lack of empathy. And there's empathy on both sides of the aisle, right? So on one end, where's the empathy for that particular passenger who also is caring for someone else, a patient? So there's some prioritization perhaps there that could have been given. And instead of the staff being all like, you're refusing, they could have shown some empathy and maybe been a little more flexible. At the same time, there's also empathy for the airlines trying to run a profitable business, and they have all these crazy practices to do that, but they could do it in a way that serves both sides. So for example, give them the ability to increase compensation limits, right? Raising the compensation limits for voluntary bumps might encourage more passengers to willingly give up their seats.
We've all been there, right? Where we're just sitting in there and they're like kind of raising the price on, hey, we're going to give you a $400 voucher. It's now $500 voucher. Like, I don't know if that just doesn't seem like a lot because it's a voucher. If it was like straight cash.
Yeah, cash. Or give me a gift card or something.
Yeah, like, give me an Apple gift card. Give me a iPad or something. I think you'd have no problem.
But make it frictionless. Like, okay, if you volunteer, we're gonna check you into a nice hotel, dinners, and all that's on us. Plus, you get a gift card. Like, make it worth my time. Like, I'm gonna not be so inconvenienced. It might actually turn into be like a fun adventure if you're gonna do that, right? So, and I will give credit to some airlines. I know Breeze, for example, they're a newer airline. If they're in a situation of risking overbooking, they'll send a notice in advance to their passengers saying, if you'd like to volunteer in advance to be bumped, we'll rebook you, plus you get $700. So, and by the way, we're not saying you're going to be, but if you volunteer in advance and that opportunity comes up, then you will get first right of a refusal sort of thing. So planning ahead, having good real-time analytics to be able to make adjustments, to be able to predict what's happening, implementing those things, I think will help avoid overbooking practices altogether. And then having some kind of a system. I mean, this is why you have AI today. These things could be managed very predictably, where the volunteering process can remain a volunteer process. And then just improving communication protocols, right? Train the staff on how to handle these situations with love and care, with empathy. I mean, like, don't get into, I have a transaction to complete. Got to get people off the flight. Like, those people are like, have lives. Something's going on. They need to be somewhere. Like, have a little heart, train the staff to have empathy first, not just complete the task in the transaction. There's human beings involved. So do better.
Do you also remember, like, one of the things that I remember, but I don't see as much anymore, is like the standby tickets that you used to have. You'd have a bunch of people waiting, and I think this is how they used to deal with it. I
think that was better, selling standby tickets. It was really,
you knew the deal, you knew the agreement.
Yeah, right? You show up, you might get in, you might not get in, and you got a sweet deal about it. But it was never an overbooking problem. It didn't happen, and the airlines made good money doing that. So, it seems like, why do they move away from that? I don't, Well, one time there was an airline. Like, this is the weirdest thing. My son, you got to notice that they were delayed about an hour and a half. And then right about the time you need to be at the airport to check in, they changed the delay back to only 40 minutes.
Yeah,
And I was like, this is
that's happened
interesting.
to me too.
I'm like, is this their
what are you
game
doing?
to avoid paying, compensating people for overbooking? So they're going to tell you they're going to be 2 hours delayed, so you don't show up, and then they change it. So by the time you show up, oh, sorry, the plane took off. It's like, I'm like that. I was like, I hope they're not doing that, because that's really like, that's just bad. Like that's a bad practice, and I'm not going to say
they're shaking the tree there, trying to get people to.
It's like, that's so like shrewd and tricky, and come on. But again, it's tied to lack of empathy, and empathy into every system that they have in place. Because if there was, there'd be a smoother process, including a smoother rebooking with options. There used to be a time where airlines would, you can take the value of your ticket and apply it to another airline. They used to do that kind of thing where there was credit, they could transfer. I mean, even offering that, it's like, hey, we're overbooked, but you value the ticket, we're going to rebook you on another airline. You know, they have a flight in 2 hours. That, I remember those things used to happen too. Somehow we got worse at this instead of getting better at this. Yeah. You know, it doesn't have to be that way. A little bit of time investing in good analytics, real-time data, getting better at analyzing patterns, making it easier for a passenger to want to volunteer, give them something valuable. If it's a really difficult, like it's an international flight, then make it where it's pleasant, book them somewhere, give them a wonderful experience, make it worth their time. Go back to standby ticket. That's probably a good way to manage all this. And whatever happens, if someone doesn't want to get off the airline because they have to be somewhere, maybe that's a doctor who has to perform a surgery, be empathetic to it. Don't like just try to get a transaction completed. So all these things these are not difficult things to implement, but they require some foresight and some willingness to want to be empathetic.
Yeah. Hopefully.
I was going to say, I just want to add, something that's very interesting, if the audience could pick up on this as well, is the systems that take out the humanity in people. I mean, I think what happens is that once you're in a system where it's so transactional, you start to see everyone as the same. So even though the doctor had to go see the patient, in the way that the industry had been up to that point, there was like, I don't care if you're a doctor, you're the same as the next person. You got chosen to leave and now you have to go. Like, you have to imagine how long that system's gone on, how brainwashed individuals have become to not even think for a second and be like, wait, this is a doctor who has to go see patients. Let me connect the dots here and let's see if we can work with this person in some way. You know,
Well, now we're going to add AI to this at some point. Probably manage this, and someone will turn the screws to make it, more and more efficient. But the AI won't have even that ability. Well, you'd have to program it in. You'd have to program humanity into the engineering of whatever the system is. And I don't know how to do that, but there won't be this conversation like, hey, you can't do this human to human because this, and someone will be like, okay, yeah, feels like AI is going to come in here and start managing this. And so we have to make sure that the AI is either empathetic or figures out win-win scenarios.
And I get the desire that every passenger is no different than the other passenger. I get that. There's actually empathy in that process, in the thinking that no one should get any special treatment. However, the staff should be trained to be able to discern situation by situation.
Yes.
There was absolutely no reason for this to escalate the way it did. The staff member could have said, you know what? You got to see, okay, let me see what I can do, right? They could have taken an extra step. But to your point is they get so transactionally focused that they forget to be human and forget empathy. Human dignity goes out the window. So there needs to be effort in just getting back to training people on how to be, I dare say, human sometimes. I mean, we're losing touch with that as more time goes by, I think. In some areas, we become more conscious. In other areas, we're forgetting that there's another person there. It's not just a transaction. And we need to do a lot more in instilling emotional intelligence into employees to be able to, and empowering them to be able to make different choices. That's the key thing too, because you can train them all you want, but if they have no power, what's the point, right? You have to empower them to be able to change or influence the system in that moment to benefit the situation.
Well, Tulio, 30, 40 years from now, they'll probably be replaced by, a Tesla robot or something at the gate there doing it. And
To that
the
point,
seat will automatically just jet you out.
no, but to that
You're
point,
strapped
guys,
in and just flies right out, and you're done.
yeah, I don't know. Just to add to that is that if these systems are not resolved by that time, I think AI is going to be able to pull. It's going to a lot of the issues that we're running into are the systems running for the time that it had run, and then eventually a 2017 situation occurred. I think with AI, it's going to expedite that. So if there are brokenness in the system and you have the AI run the brokenness, they're going to run it better than any other human. You have to imagine maybe there weren't scenarios in like 2017 happening more often because there were good players in the system that made that discernment. Now you take an AI that's literally black and white. This is how it works. You're going to see those problems arise when there's no human element or attack. And I think when that comes to light, then adjustments will be made. If anything, I hate to say it wasn't a blessing that happened in 2007. It was a horrible scenario. But if it had not happened, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. And if anything, AI would be running that old system to a T, if that makes sense. People will be robotically removed from an airplane without even a second thought, because that's the system.
Well, right? That talks to, we had a guest not too long ago on our guest series on Thursday mornings, Shojan with AI2030.org, which is a think tank focused exactly on this purpose, is to make sure AI has some ethical standards built in, make sure empathy, love, and these things take play so that can't happen. Because if you'd have robotics and AI that are completely trained in just being totally efficient, it's going to be chaos,
Oh, yeah.
But they can be trained to be efficient, but also be empathetic and not introduce friction. This is the key thing. It's got to be frictionless. Yeah. Then they can probably do a better job than humans because they don't have the emotions or the bad day or whatever feelings going on for that individual. They can just execute that better.
We are seeing signs that AI is actually scoring better on some of these empathetic things when engineered that way. Because like you said, too, humans have bad days or things like that. AI doesn't. So there is a movement for adding this emotional, empathetic ability to AI and to understand the situation. But I don't know.
We can see exponential improvement as long as that continues to be a main focus, to have a human element into it. Absolutely.
So on this airline issue, I think we need to basically balance out the win-wins here. I still feel like, if I purchase a ticket, that it should be, I could purchase one that can't be involuntarily bumped. I mean, that should be my right. Like if I'm paying a little bit higher or something for that, or I'm paying lower for one that, okay, I'll take the chance. I don't know. The agreement to me in place isn't something that I don't expect it, right? The potential for this to be forcibly removed from the plane just doesn't seem like it's in the agreement that's happening here when I purchased that ticket. So
I agree with you. There should be regulation where they get fined when they do that, because that's an inefficiency that affects the consumer. That's not the consumer's fault.
Yeah, it should be something that it's going to cost you a little more. Hey, you're going to do this to us. It's going to cost you a little bit more. So tread carefully. I'm sure there's a way to make it more of a win-win, like we have with standby tickets, and where the agreement was there, right? We knew chances are we might not get on a flight. All right, we're going to move to Airbnb. Ash,
yes,
give us the background on this scandal and how it wasn't Airbnb per se, but it's the Airbnb system and how it failed here.
No, absolutely. So in 2016, reports began surfacing about widespread discrimination on the Airbnb platform, with many users sharing their experience under the hashtag, oh guys, this is horrible, hashtag Airbnb while black. These reports are highlighted that black guests were being disproportionately rejected by hosts compared to white guests. Studies confirm these experiences. Researchers from Harvard Business School found that guests with distinctively African-American names were 16% less likely to be accepted than those with white-sounding names, even when all other factors were identical. The issue led to lawsuits filed against Airbnb, accusing the platform of enabling discrimination. The company then faced a massive public relations crisis, with activists and users calling for changes to prevent such biases. So, Steve, why do you think this happened?
So I think, you've got this decentralized model. So Airbnb operates on this, that allows hosts to make decisions on who stays in their properties. You got the public making decisions on there. And let's face it, there's a huge chunk of the public that sometimes shouldn't be making decisions like this because they've got some biases or, that we already know about, and we would never do business with them if we knew all this stuff. But so you got the public offering a service here to the public, trying to get this service. And so it wasn't something that like Airbnb set out to do. It was just this nature of the system in this model. And so when you've got enough gray area for people to abuse things, there's going to be people that abuse it. So that was kind of, just inherent in the system is this. So in this case, we've got human bias coming in, right? So you've got these, Airbnb has policies against discrimination, but, it's a policy. Sometimes people just aren't going to read it, or it's not going to be part of the culture, maybe as much as it should be when you're in this kind of system. Then Airbnb, I think they took some heat for how they handled complaints, just not being adequate enough, and many users kind of felt their grievances weren't being taken seriously. So that's why you started, getting some more steam built into this before it kind of broke loose. And there wasn't a lot of transparency with how they dealt with discrimination, and so just made people more and more angry going here. So it kind of highlights several just systemic issues here. Tulio, let's dive in a little bit more on how this was happening and what they did to try and fix it, because I think there's a lot of businesses out there that are trying to do this model, the same model as Airbnb, where it's, you've got this sort of peer-to-peer sharing economy model. But with that, you may have some issues. And so Airbnb, once this was kind of brought to light and it had enough momentum, said, okay, we need to figure out how to solve this. So what did they do on their end?
So you can imagine, to a certain degree, there was a thinking, it'd be so nice to have a profile picture and your name on your profile. So it's personal. It's, good thinking, right? But perhaps it wasn't put through a reality check on how that could be translated, right? So having a picture, your name, could facilitate discrimination from those characters who might have biases. So unlike when you book through a traditional booking system where you're pretty much anonymous, you could be denied, right? So that was something that might have been thought as a great idea, maybe needed a little bit more vetting and testing and validating to see if it was. It turns out that wasn't such a great idea. So, and also there's the question of host autonomy versus regulation, right? Balancing the economic benefits of the host autonomy with the need for regulation to prevent discrimination is a challenge. Too much autonomy without oversight can lead to abuses. So the beauty of that platform is the self-managed, autonomous, not too much oversight, people-to-people kind of relationship. But unfortunately, with some bad characters, right, could cause problems for everybody else. So you have to have some guidance, right? Some updates, some regulations. So they did work on anti-discrimination policies. They made some updates to it. Their policy included a commitment to fighting bias and ensuring inclusivity, and they provided clear guidelines prohibiting discrimination based on race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, and other protected categories. And then they put in place this project called Lighthouse, which was a data collection and analysis project. So they, in partnership with some civil rights organization like Color of Change, they created this initiative which was aimed to identify and measure discrimination on the platform. They started doing that by analyzing data and the experiences to get a better understanding of where and how biases was occurring. Again, some of these things probably would have been good to have been done along the way. And for any company that's in this space, there's actual ethical practices for when you put something out in the marketplace for doing this kind of thing.
Kind of a new model, right? So it's like you can maybe try and focus group some of this, but are you going to get some racists on the focus group that is going to highlight the problem for you? Probably not. So it's kind of like this is a new business model, and you could maybe predict some of this would happen, but
it's hard. It's hard.
I can see where it's like, oh shoot, didn't think about that.
Yeah.
So, but this is a new business model for this era, so it's a good point for anyone else who's trying to go disrupt an industry the same way. Is hey,
the good news about these kinds of scenarios is they really highlight it. And then, a few years ago, there was a big conversation and a big movement around this idea of privilege, right? So it did highlight this idea that some people are just completely unaware that this takes place. So where would they have thought, oh, if I do this, this might create discrimination for a certain group of people? So that's where it becomes important to have good, diverse teams.
Yeah, and that was another
environment. This would have been avoided, right?
Yeah, Airbnb, like that, to their credit, I think after the fact was like, okay, wait, we need to make sure we've got diversity
exactly on our team,
in our system here, so that someone will be like,
right,
guys.
I mean, no disrespect. You got a bunch of white guys from Stanford. They may not know that this problem occurs, right? So it's and it highlighted that. It became culturally an awareness for a lot of folks who just didn't even think about it. It's like, wow, this is something we need to be proactively aware of. And we have to make sure our teams are diverse enough so that there's thoughts and input put into this process that is truly representative of the reality in the world. So all that's good. And then, they also made an anti-discriminatory pledge, which was a community commitment. They introduced a pledge where they required all users to agree to treat everyone on the Airbnb community with respect without judgment. So they then turned this into a movement to raise awareness. And then anybody who refused to agree to that agreement, they just weren't allowed to book on the platform. That's fine. You don't agree with it, you don't book with us. They also created an open door policy, which created more support for affected guests. So this basically was a way of promising to find an alternative accommodation for guests who might have been experiencing discrimination. This is a wonderful step forward to saying, hey, if you're going to have a problem because of people on our platform, we're going to take responsibility for that and help you, versus saying, hey, we're not responsible. We're just a platform that connects people. So I thought this was a good move.
Like we'll solve this problem right here and now. We're going to help you out of your situation. It's the Band-Aid for the time, but it's a good just making sure you've got something in place there.
Yeah.
People are empowered to be like, damn, I'm sorry. Let's get you in a situation right now that you're happy with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we'll take care of this.
And then, like we said, I think probably the one that had the most impact is their diversity and inclusion initiatives, right? They made some internal changes to make sure that the teams had promoted diversity within their own work environment. So that the teams working on these initiatives would be fully representative of all the different consumer groups. And then they started to actually design technology to be more inclusive as well, so that they can reduce the likelihood of bias. They made design changes such as de-emphasizing user photos in the booking process, and this helps a lot. So these are good. Then the next step was to also train hosts. So create more programs to educate the hosts, offering them training about unconscious bias, because not everyone consciously made these decisions. Sometimes it's an unconscious bias for whatever reason. So that's just ignorance, right? So educating people and giving them access to better information could raise awareness that this is not something that's cool. You don't want to do this to people. So that helped reduce discriminatory behavior amongst the hosts. And then, of course, their partnership with advocacy groups. This was a collaborative effort and still continues to be a collaborative effort, which helps them to measure how effective they are at addressing these concerns. Because, it's one thing having your own system in place, drinking your own Kool-Aid. It's another thing having a third party that can kind of give you the guidance and say, hey, you're kind of not on track or kind of off track, you're doing well. So that's a big investment that they made, which I think they ought to be applauded for. And lessons are learned from these kinds of things, right? So moving forward, hopefully other companies will take these lessons and say, we need to do more of that ourselves and replicate this model so that we can avoid these issues altogether.
I think like you're seeing these business systems evolve. This is evolution. It's process, and it's not pretty sometimes, right? It can be messy. And so this is a new system, and we didn't see this potential cancer in this system. So if you're starting one of these or working in one of these, peer-to-peer shared economy kind of models where you're doing planning to disrupt an industry or change the way people do things like that, we see that with some people are monetizing their homes. We see it with people monetizing their vehicles, right? Like Uber, all the different things going on there. So it's just this new model. But if you're thinking about developing a model like that, this is a lesson here on you really need to put an extra emphasis on focusing on issues of discrimination and other abuses, by people who participate in the system, who may be bad actors, and you need to make sure your culture is not about that, basically.
And the banking system had similar issues too, in terms of how they would target promotions for various consumers. They were allowed to use certain psychographic, demographic information before, where now that then the laws were passed that doesn't allow them to do that, because it turned out that they create some, even the system-wide created some discrimination and bias. So there's a lot of use cases out there that people can dig into and study about how to avoid this. Especially if you're a very consumer-driven type of business, you want to study up on this so that you do it correctly.
And I think there's things you don't know are going to happen, and they end up happening. Because I think one of the questions probably the audience is going to have is, okay, I'm a startup and I might not be ready to diversify my team yet because my team is just me, right? And in that time, I think when things happen, that peer-to-peer, I think just being transparent, acknowledging it happened, and we might not have the solution yet, but we're working towards and making strides towards the solution, and then presenting the actions being taken. I think people a lot of times will acknowledge and appreciate that they were heard, right? And I think one of the patterns I'm catching here is it's one thing for it to happen, and then there's another point where people are saying, hey, we have reached out and they are not solving our problem, or there wasn't enough being done, and we had to keep outcrying in order for action to be taken. Yes.
This is a perfect transition to our next one because.
Oh wow! Yes.
Because I mean, literally, you get really what seemed like an authentic response from Airbnb, where it's like, okay, yeah, we didn't see this. What can we do? And there's all these steps they're taking. Trying to be a good citizen, good community member, and even some of their ad messaging, I think, became more, putting more love into the world there. So, to your point, Ash, our last scandal we're covering is Carnival Cruise Line. Give us the background here.
Oh, man. So in 2019, Carnival Cruise Line and its Princess subsidiary, the world's largest cruise operator, found itself at the center of a massive environmental scandal. These guys were fined $20 million for illegally dumping waste into the ocean. And then the worst part here, falsifying records to cover up these actions. So not only were they doing it, but they were also falsifying that it was happening. So what made this even more egregious was the fact that this fine came on top of a previous $40 million fine in 2016 for a similar violation, making it clear this was literally not an isolated issue, but a part of their system. They do the thing, they cover it up afterwards. You would think they would have learned, right? And then they did it again. So it's super crazy. So Steve, can you tell me why does this happen?
Well, that $40 million fine too, that the Department of Justice called it the largest ever criminal penalty involving deliberate vessel pollution. That was in 2016, right? So then you're just 3 years later, it's like, okay, 2019, you find another $20 million.
It's like they pulled the playbook. Like, this is the bonus playbook to see how I'm going to make my money and then jump out.
The judge at the time said, you not only work for employees and shareholders, you are a steward for the environment. The environment needs to be a core value. And I hope and pray it becomes your daily anthem, which really, I mean, that's such a like a conscious capitalism kind of approach by a judge saying, hey, you need to make the community, the environment, you need to make this part of your daily ethos there. You need to be concerned about the environment, not just someone who's, concerned about making a profit and what the quarterly, returns look like in your shareholder investments. So I think that quote, I mean, it points out the failure here. It just wasn't valued. So
this is what blows my mind. You're a cruise ship. The ocean is part of your product. Why are you dumping in the ocean? That's your product.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes no sense. And this judge was just talking common sense to them. Like, what's wrong with you guys? That's part of your customer base. Your product is the ocean. How you take care of it. If you don't take care of it, you got nothing to cruise on. I mean,
literally, Tulio. It's so
some of this stuff is like, who's in charge of these decisions over there? What's happening?
I mean, who's their I mean, even in terms of marketing, I think the judge was like, you guys should be the biggest advocates of the ocean. You guys should be leading the stride on, activism towards the ocean. And the fact that you're not, it's just crazy. Like you couldn't even think of an angle here. Like you would think they would be the ultimate advocate for all that. When a customer sees the cruise line, they think, oh, these guys are also investing a ton towards making sure the ocean is crystal clear and beautiful for us to enjoy and experience. It wasn't even a thought.
Yeah. And it's not, and the whole thing about the community aspect of conscious capitalism is that you're part of a bigger system, because what you're doing doesn't just, maybe that helps your bottom line. And it's not just that you're dumping trash. It's that you're wrecking a system. Maybe you kill off some keystone species and you end up having just this collapse of the ecosystem right there. So now there's, no more otters, and now the sea urchins end up eating the kelp beds, and the kelp beds go away, and then all the fish and everything that depended on the kelp beds, all that goes away. So it's this system that you're part of, and you need to be a steward of this system, not just because you're a boat on the water, but because all of us depend on that.
Yeah,
you're abusing it.
It's funny. I recently, I don't know how this came across, but I came across an article that there was a common practice of climbers of Mount Everest to, take care of their business, but then they would leave it there and it would be frozen. So it would freeze. So imagine all these people, just all this frozen poop everywhere. And then when it would unfreeze, you'd have basically a river of disgusting. I mean, so they changed some policies, like you do it, you take it with you. So people have to take baggies and take it with them. It's like eventually you get enough people, you get enough ships in the ocean, enough cruises where you could create a problem for, which would make the whole thing like you can't go on Mount Everest in the spring because it would be terrible, right? So it's like, some of the stuff we don't think about because we just take care of what we need in the moment. But like you said, Steven, it's about being good stewards of everything around us and not just thinking about what you need in the moment, but thinking about the next person who's coming there and the next ship coming down, or et cetera, and the divers and who's to say that stuff doesn't wash up ashore somewhere and ruin the experience for thousands of people. So just got to think these things through a little bit more, folks.
So Carnival had, their hand has been slapped twice, and maybe the second time, we can't just have fines being part of a cost of business. We got to do something about this. So there are people with conscious in the organization, like, hey, what are we doing, guys? We got to fix this. One of the things they did, which I really liked, though, out of this, was they established a board level committee focused on oversight. So the committee included independent directors with authority to review and ensure compliance with environmental regulations. So this is where I think we were talking about this. Was it healthcare, right? Like, how can we get something on the board that sees, that they need to be a little bit more compassionate. So in this case, this helped with this environmental oversight at the highest levels of the company's structure, so that, they're not just sitting around talking about profits and everything. You've got a voice in the mix talking about the environmental impact. So this is really one of these kind of solutions that we're sort of pondering in the last episode, and you see it happen here, which I think is a great outcome of this that other companies can learn from. It's like, hey, if we really want to be about it, why don't we make sure our board is about it, and let's do something that gets the conversation going up there.
Especially with larger companies or publicly traded companies, if it doesn't make the board agenda, it's not a priority for the business.
Yeah.
And the environmental concern, applause for making that a board topic, and even creating a committee that oversights over it, right? Employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction, all these things, if they're not at the board, they're not discussed at the board, there's no committee addressing it, it's just a nice thing to have. So congratulations to those companies who actually elevate these things at the board level, because that's when it becomes something that you have a report to every quarter. You got to report on it, right? So people get fired if they don't report on these things.
Part of this for Carnival too is publicly reporting on some of these environmental things. So it's part of the conversation up there. And I think that's so often where we see these big companies just fail, is it just not being part of the conversation. So I really, as awful as this story is, there is this really good side of this that I think can be an example for other businesses, is this whole aspect of involving your board into something, a little higher purpose than just that sole pursuit of profit.
And in this case, it's like, how can we ensure that the thing that makes our business possible lasts a long time and it's of high quality, i.e. the ocean and the environment?
Absolutely. Exactly.
Right? That's what makes your business possible. Take care of the thing that makes your business possible, not just for yourself, but go and advocate for it, for the planet, because that's how your business runs. Like, think about the next 100 years, not just the next quarter.
So, and I think too, if you look at, this is consciousness evolving, because I'm sure, I'm just making this up at the top of my head, but I can imagine like the Titanic just dumping the trash off the end of the boat, just because people just weren't thinking about the environment like they do now. So you can see consciousness evolve to where if you aren't getting your act together at the stage of where consciousness is, you're going to be held accountable and you're going to get slammed for it. So this is what I'm talking about when I say there's going to be a lot of pain for a lot of companies, because they aren't operating at that, postmodern level of consciousness, which is kind of demanding some of this stuff. So let's just go over real quick here some of the trends in these travel scandals. So I see customers as a stakeholder, so basically not meeting the customer's best interest with United and Airbnb. We've seen that with a lot of the other scandals. It's just like not looking for after the customer's best interest. For Carnival, again, we see the larger community and world as the stakeholder just not being considered here. So, again, like I said, another conscious capitalism stakeholder failure there. And both those are ultimately culture and leadership issues. So I like we mentioned, getting to leadership, getting to the board and putting something in place there to help with that. And then, of course, with a lot of these, it's just, insufficient regulatory oversight. I think like the airlines being able to drag someone off, it just seems, it's just inherently wrong, and just, it does not seem part of the contract, but we allow it. And Carnival, being a repeat offender and having this go on for so long, just, we weren't on top of our game there. So some of the trends we see on this one. So we've covered financial services, we've covered automotive, we've covered healthcare and travel scandals and system failures in this bad system series. So in the next show of our bad systems, we're going to try and pull this all together by looking at some of the trends we see here across all those. And the hope is that if you want to build love into your business systems, that there are certain areas to give special attention to. So thank you for tuning in, and we will see you on the next Bliss Business Podcast.